Please remember that on the 30th of this month, a new documentary on the Crusades will be released on Patreon. And also remember the pasta is gorgeous. If you are anything like me and you love medieval times, the Middle Ages as much as I do, then I reckon that you must have asked the following question quite a few times. If I could find a way to reach an alternate reality, to open up a portal to a different dimension where we could experience, say, 14th century England, what would it feel like? The people we would see, the places, villages, the languages we would hear, the environment, the food. Well, let's open up this portal, shall we? Alright then, I think we're all set. I've got my wallet, I've got my sword, yes, my cape, you never know these days. So, right, now we've got our portal. How do we set it? Let me see, there's an ignition button. Oh, hold on a minute, we need to set a date. But apparently there are only two possible options, 1300s and 1400s. But hold on a minute, does it really change that much? Does it really matter that much? I mean, think about it, if it were 11th century and 15th century, then I can understand it would be completely different, but 1300 and 1400, would it really change that much? Actually, you'd be astonished. The difference in scenery, population, environment would be incredible. Even the architecture will have changed, and you don't even have to have a full century of difference. Even a few decades will change completely what you will see. Why? Well, there is one word for it. Yersinia pestis bacterium, 1346-1353. The facultative anaerobic organism, the Coccobacillus that will claim almost half of the entire population of England. What we call the Black Death. Now, if you're interested in Black Death, I've got a dedicated video, you will find a link in the description below. But for this video, suffice to say that the amount of people that the Black Death will claim around 1348, 1349 in England will change completely your experience as a time traveler, depending on what date you will choose to set on your portal. Give or take, we can estimate a 50% of population drop in the whole country, going from 5 million inhabitants at the beginning of the century, reaching 2.5 million inhabitants by the end of the century. The total population shrinks by 5 to 10% between 1315 and 1325, by 30 to 40% in the Great Plague of 1348-1349, and by a further 15 to 25% over the rest of the century. Large numbers of children cannot quickly reverse these losses. As you will have seen from the effects on the landscape, it is a traumatic experience for the whole society. Now, such enormous population drop, such dramatic demographic change will not be recovered, it will not be compensated for quite a long time. In fact, before actually having England reaching again 5 million inhabitants, we will have to wait until 1630s, and the country's population will grow in another 500,000 inhabitants only by 1740s. So what did medieval people look like? How different would they be from us? Well, if we look at the general population, most likely they would be slightly shorter than us and they would have smaller feet. Again, looking in general terms. But if you look at the noblemen and the aristocratic family, then most likely they would be basically as tall as you would be. You, average modern man, of course. Now, the reason for that, we have got two reasons actually. Reason number one, nutrition. The difference of quality of nutrition between the peasants and the farmers and the common populace and the aristocracy was so big that they will influence their development, and also genetic selection will play an important part in the general population size and height. Another important thing to consider in medieval time is longevity and life expectation. Now, first off, you need to reach 20 years of age. But if you do manage to reach 20 years of age and you don't die before, then you will most likely live for another 28 to 32 years. Of course, this will depend on the sort of wealth that you enjoy, the sort of labor and work that you do, and the idea of going into battle will, of course, change that percentage copiously. But again, in general terms, we could say that the average medieval person who has at least reached 20 years of age will probably live until his 50th birthday. Of course, considering we're talking average, that also means that most likely the other half of the population will never reach 50 years of age. So what this means is that if we were to now travel through a time portal to medieval England in the 14th century, then most likely the majority of the population would be rather young. It would be very difficult to run into elderly people. In fact, again, in England in the 14th century, only 5% of the population was 65 years of age and beyond. And I'd like to underline that the majority of people who who became very elderly were most of the times church people, bishops, etc., because they were enjoying a very high level of wealth. But for the normal population, I would consider, yes, 5%. Now, well, that is interesting, because not only means that if you were to walk into a medieval village, that probably almost half of the people you would run into would be under the age of 15, with an average of 20-year-old people. But it also helps us understand the meaning behind that idea that we often see in either role-playing games, video games, and books and novels of the elder of the village. There weren't that many, so that explains why, when you were in medieval times and you had one elderly person or two elderly people in a small congregation, then they would be considered to be wise, because they were indeed rare. A younger population also means having to take responsibility at a younger age. So often when we look at the youth in our day and age, we immediately think, the youth now, they grow up so quickly. But if you were to look at medieval times, actually, you would probably never say that sentence again. In medieval times, your son would be expected to start working already at age 7. And in some areas of the country, age 7 would also be the minimum age to be able to be hung for theft. Marriage will be also completely different. Marriage age for males, 14-year-old will be already okay for marrying, and when you turn 15, you could become a full-time soldier. So it wouldn't be strange to imagine some of the men-at-arms that fought, for example, the 100 Years' War or the Battle of Agincourt, probably were boys-at-arms. Girls could marry at age 12, but could not cohabit. You could not have cohabitation with your husband until you were 14. In some juries in England, you could be as young as 12 years old to serve in the jury, with your ideas having legal repercussions. But I think Edward III is an excellent example. He led, at age 20, a full army of knights, men-at-arms, archers, to battle against the Scots. At age 20, he made that decision. And even crazier, Prince Edward was given command of a full battalion of vanguard, so we are talking actual hand-to-hand combat at age 16. Now take that and compare it to modern times. It would be like that the son or the nephew of a politician who is only 16 years of age, a 16-year-old boy, of having command of trained Marines. Now imagine the Marines for a moment. Imagine the Marines talking to each other, and they're like, hey, seems like the son of the politician wants us to go to war now and actually attack with frontal assault. Oh, does he? All right, children out of here, let us do our job. By medieval time, that conversation will have been completely different. Hey, apparently the prince wants us to go front charge, frontal assault in the battle in 5 minutes' time. Does he? Well, the prince says so. Now, in order to understand the aesthetics of a medieval town and a medieval village, we need to understand that there was a We need to understand some basic principles of medieval architecture, and particularly looking at the houses of the poor, because that's what we're focusing on this video, the majority of the population. So within the feudal system, of course, there will be a massive difference between the houses built by the feudal lords, which would be the best looking, maybe second only to church buildings, because you did have some amazingly lavish parishes. So anyways, these two, depending on the place, these two would be the better looking and also the best houses as far as construction is and technology is concerned. But the houses of the people, the common inhabitants of a medieval town, what would they look like? Well, there are some common aspects. For example, the majority of these houses would only have one room, and also they wouldn't really differ that much in their size. But there will be a huge difference as far as the materials used for building are concerned. And even if we only look at medieval England, which is basically the focus of this video, we will still have quite a lot of difference. Still, probably the most common house, wooden framed, straw thatched house, but regional variation will play a significant role. So if you push the button for the portal and you went to the beginning of the 14th century, and please forget those picturesque, quaint houses that you can imagine when thinking of a fairy tale, because at the beginning of the century, actually the trend was the building of shoddy houses. With the word shoddy, of course, we mean cheap, quickly built houses that needed to be replaced after 30 or 40 years already. Now, towards the middle of the 14th century, this practice will discontinue and better quality houses will start to be produced. But the shoddy houses had some common things. First off, they didn't have foundation plinth for the wooden beams, and what that means is that, again, after a certain period of time, the timber will rot. But were the walls made of stone or timber? Well, possibly the idea of short walls made most likely of lime wash cob is definitely the most popular, and these would be thatched, of course. And then we mentioned straw. Other possibilities, we'll get there in a moment, but mostly thatched with straw. But although this thatch would actually go all the way down, covering the walls almost up to your chest, and then you would see very narrow windows. So why using this thatch this way, which almost looks like a frown? Well, the reason is protection, because consider that, yes, so these walls, these cob walls, they could be made of, for example, a mixture of soil, clay, straw, and also animal dung. This means that if they were to be wet by the rain or the snow, this could menace the integrity of the wall, hence they needed to be protected. Now, generally speaking, a house made of stone was also a symbol of higher status, but that depends on the area. In fact, there were areas of the country where stone was a lot more available than oak, for example. If we look at houses in Dartmoor, for example, where stone was a lot more available and it was easier than carrying long and heavy wooden planks, there people live in granite houses with the thatch being made of reed or bracken. Now again, we say straw is the most common material, shall we call it, used to create thatch in other parts of the country, although some of these thatches, if you can pluralize it, would also contain lichen and moss. In Kent, for instance, elm was a lot more common, and therefore many houses will be framed with elm. Whereas if we go to Cornwall, we will see that a lot of houses will have walls made of slate blocks, being roofed with slate slabs. Okay, number ones, but I hope that you enjoyed this time-traveling experience to medieval England. If you're interested in this kind of things and you'd like to know more about the bibliography that I've used, then please check the description below. This was based on the work of Ian Mortimer, who is a fantastic PhD in history, also has a master degree, Bachelor of Arts. He's got everything, you name it, and he specializes in describing medieval England. So if you're interested, that's a very good read, and I strongly suggest you to buy the book, and perhaps I will actually review the book in one coming video, in a future video. I thank you for your time and support, and thank you for watching. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.